You promised, she whispered to the empty room, her hands trembling as a searing, phantom pain ripped through her collarbone. It wasn't her flesh being pierced. It was his teeth sinking into someone else. Lisa gasped, collapsing to the cold hardwood floor as the golden, thrumming thread of their fated mating bond violently snapped, replaced instantly by the hollow metallic taste of absolute betrayal. He marked her, Alpha King David. The man who had sworn on his very soul that she was his equal had just claimed another woman. The packed lands outside her window remained silent, entirely ignorant of the queen they had just lost. Lisa didn't scream. She didn't cry. She slowly stood up, her shadow stretching long in the moonlight. If he wanted a new mate, he could have her. But he would never have Lisa again. The physical agony of the severed bond felt as though a hot iron had been pressed directly against the base of Lisa's neck. She pressed a trembling hand over the unblemished skin of her collarbone, feeling the frantic, erratic pulse beating beneath it. Her inner wolf, usually a vibrant and vocal presence in her mind, had curled into a tight, silent ball of pure agony. David had told her to wait. Just one more summit, Lisa. He had murmured into her hair only 48 hours ago, his hands mapping the curve of her spine. Let me secure the Northern Territories. Then we announce it. Then I mark you, and the world knows you are mine. He had lied. Or perhaps, in the intoxicating atmosphere of pack politics and power, he had simply found a better offer. It didn't matter. The raw, undeniable biology of the shifter bond did not deal in nuances or political strategies. A mark was absolute. By sinking his teeth into the Northern Alpha's daughter, David had permanently tied his soul to another, relegating Lisa to the agonizing status of a rejected true mate. She had to leave. If she stayed, the biological imperative of the broken bond would slowly drive her mad, or worse, reduce her to a subservient shell. Forced to watch another woman wear her crown, Lisa moved with a terrifying, mechanical efficiency. She bypassed the sprawling walk-in closet filled with silks and designer gowns David had bought her. Instead, she moved to the bottom drawer of a heavy oak dresser, pulling out a pair of faded denim jeans, a heavy woolen sweater, and a pair of worn leather boots. These were relics of her life before she had been discovered by the king, before the fairy tale that had just metamorphosed into a nightmare. Into a nondescript black canvas duffel bag, she shoved a stack of cash she had been quietly hoarding, a burner phone, and 3 airtight vials of wolfsbane extract. The hardest part wouldn't be leaving the estate. It would be hiding from a man who commanded the largest intelligence network in the shifter world. David owned senators, tech moguls, and local police chiefs. To disappear from the Alpha King meant disappearing from the modern grid entirely. Lisa walked into the ensuite bathroom. She unstoppered one of the vials of wolfsbane. The acrid, toxic smell of it made her eyes water and her wolf whimper in protest. Diluting a few drops in a bottle of strong, citrus-scented astringent, she began to scrub her own skin. It burned terribly, turning her pale skin an angry, flushed red. The wolfsbane would temporarily kill her natural scent, replacing the sweet, distinct aroma of rain and wild freesia that David loved so much with the harsh, flat smell of chemicals and deadened pheromones. She slung the bag over her shoulder and slipped out the French doors into the midnight rain. The Adirondack estate was heavily guarded, but Lisa knew the patrols. She knew that at 2:15 a.m., the eastern perimeter guards shifted their focus to the main gate for the changing of the watch. She moved like a shadow through the dripping pines, her boots making no sound on the damp earth. The cold rain was a blessing, washing away whatever trace of her the wolfsbane hadn't masked. By 4 a.m., she was standing under the flickering fluorescent lights of a deserted highway gas station. When the Greyhound bus pulled up, its air brakes hissing loudly in the quiet night, she paid the driver in damp $20 bills. She took a seat in the very back. leaning her head against the vibrating, condensation-streaked window. As the bus accelerated, pulling her further away from the packed lands, Lisa felt a final, sickening tug in her chest, the absolute death of her fated bond. She closed her eyes, letting the darkness of the highway swallow her whole. 6 months later, Oak Haven, Oregon. The bell above the door of the Rusty Spoon Diner jingled, cutting through the low hum of the refrigeration units and the sizzle of bacon on the flat-top grill. "Table 4 needs a wipe-down, Leah," Patty, the diner's manager, called out, not looking up from the cash register. "On it," Lisa replied, her voice smooth and devoid of its once aristocratic inflection. She grabbed a damp rag and a bottle of industrial sanitizer, moving swiftly toward the booth. Her hair, once a flowing, meticulously maintained cascade of dark waves, was now chopped bluntly at her shoulders and dyed a nondescript, mousy brown. The loose-fitting diner uniform hid the athletic, predatory grace of her shifter physique. To the logging town of Oak Haven, she was just Leah, a quiet, hard-working drifter who paid her rent in cash and kept to herself. It was a grueling, agonizingly mundane existence, and it was keeping her alive. Wiping down the Formica table, Lisa caught her reflection in the rain-streaked window. She looked tired. The rings under her eyes were bruised purple, a testament to the chronic insomnia that plagued rejected mates. Every night, her wolf paced against the confines of her mind, howling for a connection that no longer existed. To survive the mental toll, Lisa had begun using a harsh silver nitrate soap. It was a dangerous, painful practice that left her skin perpetually dry and irritated, but it effectively suppressed her shifter aura. To any passing wolf, she would smell like nothing more than a sickly human. "Coffee, black, when you get a second, darling," a gruff voice said. Lisa turned. It was just Old Man Miller, a retired logger who came in every Tuesday. "Coming right up, Mr. Miller," she said, offering a tight, practiced smile. She walked behind the counter, reaching for the carafe. As she poured the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug, the hair on the back of her arms suddenly stood up. It wasn't a sound. It was a subtle shift in the air pressure, a heavy, suffocating weight that suddenly blanketed the diner. Lisa froze, the carafe hovering an inch above the mug. Her dormant wolf, asleep for months, suddenly snapped its jaws, its ears pinning back in pure, instinctual panic. She didn't turn around immediately. She focused on steadying her breathing, forcing her heart rate to remain at a calm, human rhythm. She placed the carafe down gently, picked up the mug, and turned. Sitting in a booth by the door was a man who hadn't been there a minute ago. He was wearing a tailored dark suit that looked jarringly out of place in Oak Haven. He wasn't David. But Lisa recognized the rigid, predatory posture, the unnaturally still way he sat, and the faint, unmistakable scent of ozone and iron. He was a tracker, an elite enforcer from the Royal Guard. Lisa's blood turned to ice water. She walked over to Mr. Miller, placing his coffee down with a steady hand. "Enjoy," she murmured. She casually turned her back to the room, walking toward the swinging doors of the kitchen. "Don't run," her instincts screamed. "If you run, you trigger his prey drive." She pushed through the doors into the steamy kitchen, the noise of the diner muffling behind her. She walked straight past the fry cook, her eyes locked on the heavy steel door of the alley exit. The tracker hadn't looked directly at her. He was likely just sweeping the region, checking for any anomalies. But if he caught even a microscopic trace of her original scent beneath the silver nitrate, he would call the king. Lisa pushed the alley door open and stepped into the freezing Oregon rain, pulling her apron over her head. Her life as Leah was over. It was time to become a ghost again. 3,000 miles away, the Alpha King stared at the sprawling map projected onto the glass wall of his war room. David looked nothing like the impossibly handsome, commanding monarch who had graced the cover of Forbes only a year ago. His jaw was covered in a rough, unkempt shadow of a beard. His eyes, usually a vibrant, piercing gold, were bloodshot and sunken. He wore a crisp dress shirt, but the collar was unbuttoned, the tie discarded somewhere in the cavernous office. "We've swept the eastern seaboard 3 times, sire." Marcus, his beta, said quietly from the shadows of the room. "The financial audits turned up nothing. No credit card usage, no passports flagged. She hasn't reached out to any of her former contacts." David didn't respond. He stepped closer to the map, resting his forehead against the cool glass. His chest ached. A constant, throbbing hollowness that no amount of scotch or violence could numb. The mark on his neck, the bite he had given Lady Victoria to secure the Northern Treaty, felt like a parasitic infection. He had been so incredibly arrogant. He had believed the ancient texts that claimed a fated bond could withstand anything, even a political claiming. He had thought he could placate the Northern Pax with a formal marriage, keeping Victoria as a figurehead queen, while maintaining Lisa as his true, fated mate in secret until the political climate stabilized. He had fundamentally misunderstood the purity of a true mate's soul. The moment his teeth had pierced Victoria's skin, completing the binding ritual, he had felt Lisa's presence violently rip itself from his mind. It was a metaphysical amputation. He had rushed back to his chambers that night, ignoring the celebrations, ignoring his new queen. But the room had been empty. Lisa was gone, leaving behind all the diamonds, the clothes, and the life he had built for her. She had taken nothing but her dignity. "She's alive," David growled, his voice a gravelly, terrifying rumble that vibrated the glass. "I can feel the absolute barest echo of her. She's suffocating her wolf. She's hiding." "David," Marcus said, dropping the formal title, a testament to the severity of the situation. "The pack is growing restless. Victoria is your marked mate. You haven't spoken to her in months. The Northern Alphas are taking your absence as a profound insult. If you don't return to the public eye, let them burn," David snarled, spinning around. His eyes flashed pure, feral gold, the terrifying power of the Alpha King bleeding into the room, forcing Marcus to take an involuntary step back, exposing his throat. "Let the North burn. Let the treaties rot. I do not care." He walked over to his heavy mahogany desk, gripping the edges so hard the wood groaned. "She is my soul, Marcus, and I drove her away because I thought I could play God with our biology. I will tear this continent apart inch by inch until I find her." A sharp knock on the heavy oak doors interrupted them. The King's lead intelligence officer stepped in, looking nervous. He held a sleek tablet in his hand. "My king," the officer said, bowing his head deeply. "One of our regional trackers in the Pacific Northwest just checked in. He was doing a routine sweep of a logging town in Oregon. He didn't find a cent." David's lip curled. "Then why are you interrupting me?" "Because," the officer swallowed hard. He pulled the security footage from a local diner. He was looking for transient shifters. But he found this. The officer placed the tablet on the desk. David leaned over. The image was grainy, captured by a cheap overhead camera. It showed a waitress in a drab uniform, her hair dyed a dull brown, her face partially obscured as she wiped down a table. But David didn't need to see her face. He knew the exact, elegant slope of her shoulders. He knew the way her hands moved. His heart, which had been beating in a lethargic, depressed rhythm for 6 months, suddenly slammed against his ribs like a sledgehammer. The heavy, oppressive air in the room instantly electrified. David reached out, his trembling fingers grazing the cold glass of the tablet screen over her image. "Oregon," David whispered, a terrifying, possessive smile slowly curving his lips. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes fully gold and completely devoid of mercy. "Prepare the jet. I'm going to get my wife." Lisa did not run to her apartment. Running to the small, damp basement suite on Elm Street would be a fatal mistake. The moment the tracker, whoever he was, realized she had bolted from the diner, he would access the town's pitiful employment records. They would have the address for Leah within 10 minutes. Instead, she moved with excruciating precision through the labyrinth of rain-slicked alleyways, forcing herself to walk at a brisk human pace rather than surrendering to the supernatural speed her dormant wolf craved. She kept to the shadows of overflowing dumpsters and rusted fire escapes. 2 miles from the diner, the town of Oakhaven dissolved into the encroaching timberline of the Tillamook State Forest. Lisa slipped past a chain-link fence and plunged into the dense, wet underbrush. Here, beneath the massive canopies of Douglas firs, she finally allowed a fractured sob to escape her throat. "He found me." She dropped to her knees in the mud at the base of a hollowed-out tree stump. Reaching deep inside, her fingers brushed against thick plastic. It was her secondary bug-out bag, buried 3 months ago for exactly this nightmare scenario. She yanked it free. Inside were vacuum-sealed high-calorie ration bars, a hunting knife, $5,000 in tightly rolled hundreds, and a fresh bottle of the agonizing silver nitrate body wash. She stripped off the damp diner uniform, burying it deep in the muddy hollow. The frigid Oregon rain pelted her bare skin, but the cold was nothing compared to the fiery sting of the silver nitrate she quickly scrubbed over her arms, neck, and torso. It felt like rolling in broken glass. But as she rinsed with the freezing rainwater, she knew her scent was completely deadened. She pulled on dry tactical pants, a fleece mid-layer, and a waterproof shell from the bag. By the time the sirens began to wail in Oakhaven, a coordinated, unnatural chorus of local police cruisers suddenly mobilized by an unseen hand, Lisa was already 3 miles deep into the treacherous, vertical incline of the mountain ridge. Down in the valley, the atmosphere inside the Rusty Spoon diner had shifted from mundane to suffocating. The front doors shattered off their hinges, the heavy glass raining over the linoleum floor. The remaining patrons and staff froze in sheer, primal terror. The man who walked through the destroyed entryway did not look like he belonged in this realm, let alone this town. Alpha King David stood 6'4", an imposing monolith of tailored dark wool and suppressed, lethal violence. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly, popping the ears of the humans huddled in the booths. Behind him, a dozen elite royal guards fanned out, securing the perimeter with silent efficiency. David ignored the terrified humans. His glowing, gold-flecked eyes locked onto the trackers standing by the kitchen doors. "Where?" David's voice was barely a whisper, yet it vibrated in the chest cavity of everyone present. "She went out the back, sire," the tracker said, dropping to one knee, baring his neck in absolute submission. I was sweeping the room. I felt a spike in adrenaline, human level, but by the time I turned, she was through the doors. I tracked her to the alley, but what? David advanced, his boots crunching loudly on the broken glass. "Our scent, my king. It's entirely gone. Not masked, erased. I found traces of industrial bleach, but beneath it, there is a chemical signature. Silver nitrate." David stopped dead. The breath hitched in his throat. Silver nitrate was poison to their kind. It burned the skin, sickened the blood, and systematically starved the inner wolf into a coma. That she was subjecting herself to such torture just to hide from him hit David like a physical blow. He walked slowly to the booth she had been wiping down. He ran a gloved hand over the cheap Formica table. She was here. His true mate, the queen he was supposed to crown, had been wiping tables for spare change. The guilt, acidic and burning, surged up his throat, quickly calcifying into a ruthless, terrifying determination. "Lock down the county," David ordered, his voice echoing off the cheap acoustic ceiling tiles. "No vehicles in or out. Ground all civilian aircraft. I want drones in the air with thermal imaging, and I want a 50-mile perimeter established within the hour. She does not leave these woods." The fever hit Lisa around midnight. She had found shelter in a dilapidated logging outpost, a crumbling wooden structure half swallowed by moss and decay. The roof leaked, and the wind howled through the missing window panes. But it was out of the aerial view of the drones she could hear buzzing faintly above the tree line. She huddled in the corner, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, shivering violently. The silver nitrate was wreaking havoc on her immune system. Her skin was flushed and covered in micro blisters, and her joints ached with a deep, bone-rattling cold. Her wolf was silent, trapped beneath a suffocating blanket of chemical suppression. "Just hold on," she told herself, gritting her teeth as a wave of nausea rolled over her. If you stop moving, he wins. In her fevered state, her mind cruelly played tricks on her. She thought she could smell his distinct scent, rich earth, cedar, and raw power. She remembered the weight of his heavy arm draped over her waist in the mornings, the deep rumble of his chest when he laughed. She remembered the way he had looked at her before the northern treaties had corrupted his heart, like she was the only fixed point in his turbulent universe. She pressed her hand against her collarbone. The skin was smooth, untouched, unclaimed. The phantom pain of the broken bond throbbed, a cruel reminder of the teeth that had sunk into Lady Victoria instead of her. "I won't be your dirty secret, David," Lisa whispered into the dark, her voice cracking. "I won't." Meanwhile, back in Oakhaven, David stood in the center of Lisa's basement apartment. His beta, Marcus, stood silently by the door as the king meticulously tore the place apart. David wasn't looking for clues. He was looking for pieces of her. He found a closet with 3 cheap, threadbare shirts. He found a pantry stocked with generic brand soup and stale crackers. Then he walked into the tiny, mildew-stained bathroom. Lining the edge of the rusted bathtub were empty bottles of industrial astringent and a harsh, black bar of homemade soap. David picked up the soap. It smelled strongly of lye and silver. He crushed it in his fist, the chemical burning even his hardened alpha skin. He stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. He looked like a monster. He felt like one. He had driven his fated mate into extreme poverty and self-mutilation. He had traded her absolute loyalty for a political alliance that tasted like ashes in his mouth. Victoria's mark on his neck burned, a constant, itchy reminder of his colossal failure as a man and a king. With a guttural roar that shook the very foundations of the apartment building, David drove his fist into the mirror, shattering it into 1,000 glittering pieces. His knuckles bled, but he didn't feel it. "Sire," Marcus said softly, stepping carefully into the room. "The local police have established the roadblocks on Interstate 5 and Highway 26. The thermal drones have pinged several large heat signatures in the Tillamook forest, but the canopy is too thick to differentiate between elk and a shifter. We have teams moving in on foot." David looked at his bleeding hand, then down at the crushed silver soap in the sink. "She's weak, Marcus. The silver is poisoning her. She can't stay in the woods for long without medical attention or real food. She'll have to make a play for the highway. She'll try to hitch a ride in something heavy to mask her heat signature." David's golden eyes narrowed, the strategic brilliance that made him king cutting through his emotional wreckage. "Shift the bulk of the guards to the way stations and truck stops on Interstate 5. Check every single freight carriage. Tear them apart if you have to. I am going to the border myself." By dawn, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a thick, freezing fog that clung to the asphalt of Interstate 5. Lisa stumbled down the muddy embankment, her boots slipping on the wet grass. The fever had worsened. Her vision blurred around the edges, and her breath came in ragged, painful gasps. The silver nitrate was doing its job too well. Her shifter healing factor was completely suppressed, leaving her vulnerable to the elements like a fragile human. Through the fog, the blinding halogen lights of the Cascade truck stop cut through the gloom. It was a massive, sprawling concrete lot filled with idling 18-wheelers. But it was a fortress. Lisa crouched behind a rusted guardrail, her heart hammering against her bruised ribs. Bypassing the town had been difficult, but this was impossible. Mixed among the Oregon State Troopers checking manifests were men in dark tactical gear. Royal Guards. They were physically checking the undercarriages of the trucks, running specialized scanners over the cargo holds. She had nowhere left to run. The forest behind her was swarming with tracker wolves. She could hear their distant, coordinated howls echoing over the ridge. "Think," Lisa commanded herself, biting the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper, using the pain to anchor her fading consciousness. She watched the rhythm of the checkpoint. A massive double-trailer logging truck was slowly pulling toward the exit barrier. The driver was arguing with a state trooper out the window, waving a stack of paperwork. The Royal Guard assigned to that lane was distracted, turning his head to speak into his earpiece. It was a suicidal window of opportunity. Lisa slipped over the guardrail, moving with desperate, agonizing speed. She kept her body low, sliding through the greasy puddles of the parking lot, using the massive tires of an adjacent parked rig for cover. She reached the logging truck just as the air brakes released with a deafening hiss. She threw herself under the first trailer, her hands blindly grabbing for the thick metal axles. She hauled herself up, wedging her small, battered body into the narrow cavity between the rusted undercarriage and the massive mud flaps. The metal was freezing, and the smell of diesel exhaust was suffocating. The truck lurched forward. Lisa squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to the axle with the last remnants of her strength. "Just get me past the gate. Just get me out of the county." The truck rolled toward the checkpoint. Lisa could see the heavy black boots of the guards standing just feet away from her hiding spot. The truck stopped again. "We need to inspect the undercarriage." A deep, commanding voice rang out, cutting through the low rumble of the idling engines. Lisa's blood froze in her veins. She knew that voice. It was a voice that had whispered promises against her skin, a voice that commanded armies. David was here. He was standing directly beside the truck. "I already showed the trooper my papers, buddy," the human driver yelled down. "Step out of the cab, now," David commanded, the lethal, absolute authority in his tone, leaving no room for argument. Lisa held her breath until her lungs burned. She pressed herself so flat against the metal she felt a bolt digging into her spine. The silver nitrate had masked her scent, but she was entirely exposed to a visual check. She watched David's boot step closer to the trailer. He paused. A droplet of condensation, thick with grease and the freezing fog, formed on the metal above Lisa. It dropped, splashing directly onto her cheek, washing away a tiny, microscopic patch of the silver nitrate soap. It was barely a fraction of a drop. But for an Alpha King standing 3 feet away, it was a beacon in the dark. David's boots stopped. His head slowly tilted down. He didn't bend over to look under the truck. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, his hand gripping the edge of the muddy fiberglass side panel. "Everyone stand down," David said, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated through the metal axle straight into Lisa's bones. I found her. The silence that fell over the Cascade truck stop was absolute and terrifying. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic natural disaster. The idling engine of the massive logging truck seemed to choke on its own exhaust as the oppressive, suffocating weight of the Alpha King's aura blanketed the concrete lot. Beneath the freezing metal undercarriage, Lisa couldn't breathe. Her lungs, already compromised by the silver nitrate poisoning, seized in pure panic. David didn't shout. He didn't order his men to drag her out. Instead, the king of the eastern seaboard, wearing a bespoke suit worth more than the truck he was touching, dropped to his knees in the grease-stained, freezing mud. He leaned under the chassis, his golden eyes, glowing with a fierce, unnatural light in the gloom, locked onto her. For a fraction of a second, the relief in his expression was so profound, it looked like agony. But as his heightened vision adjusted to the shadows, absorbing the reality of her physical state, that relief fractured into absolute, unadulterated horror. Lisa was shivering so violently that her teeth clicked together. Her skin, where it wasn't smeared with black axle grease, was a mottled, angry canvas of chemical burns and deep purple bruising. Her eyes, once of vibrant, challenging hazel, were sunken and clouded with fever. "Lisa," he whispered, his voice cracking, shedding every ounce of its royal authority. It was the desperate sound of a starving man finding water. He reached his large hand into the narrow cavity. "Don't," Lisa croaked, her voice barely a dry rasp over the hiss of the air brakes. She shrank back, pressing her spine so hard against a metal bolt that it tore through her fleece jacket. "Don't touch me." David flinched as if she had driven a silver blade into his chest, but the scent of her failing biology, the sickly, metallic odor of a wolf slowly dying from suppression, overrode his hesitation. "You are dying," he said, his tone shifting into the rigid, unbreakable command of an alpha. "I am not leaving you here." Before she could fight him, his hand clamped around her waist. Even through her thick tactical clothing, his touch sent a violent, chaotic jolt through her system. It wasn't the warm, golden hum of their fated bond. It was a harsh, agonizing friction, a brutal reminder that his energy was now intrinsically tied to someone else. Lisa thrashed, her boots kicking wildly against the mud flaps. "Let me go! David, I swear to God, let me go!" She was a trained fighter, a female who had earned her place in the pack hierarchy through sheer grit before he ever noticed her. But she was running on fumes and poison. David pulled her from the undercarriage with horrifying ease, dragging her out into the blinding halogen lights of the checkpoint. The Oregon State Troopers gasped, their hands instinctively dropping to their sidearms at the sight of the king pulling a filthy, struggling woman from the mud. The Royal Guards immediately formed a tight, impenetrable perimeter around them, their faces completely impassive, though their eyes tracked the surrounding woods for threats. "Put me down!" Lisa screamed, her voice cracking as a fresh wave of nausea hit her. She struck his chest with her fists, leaving smears of black grease across his pristine white shirt. David didn't retaliate. He didn't even try to restrain her hands. He simply wrapped his arms securely around her back and beneath her knees, lifting her completely off the ground. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck, despite the toxic, burning scent of the silver nitrate that immediately began to blister his own skin. "I have you," he murmured frantically into her hair, his chest heaving. "I have you. You're safe. I am not yours to have." She sobbed, the last of her adrenaline rapidly evaporating, leaving behind a cold, terrifying emptiness. Her head lolled against his shoulder as the fever finally dragged her under. "Get the medics on the jet," David roared, turning on his heel toward the waiting armada of black SUVs. "Tell the pilot if we are not airborne for the estate in 10 minutes, I will tear his throat out myself." He climbed into the back of the heavily armored vehicle, refusing to relinquish her to the pack doctor. As the SUV tore out of the truck stop, breaking the speed limit by 80 miles an hour, David sat in the dimly lit cab, cradling her broken body. He looked down at the chemical burns blistering his own hands where he touched her. It was a physical manifestation of what he had done to her soul. He rested his forehead against hers, his tears mixing with the freezing Oregon rain and motor oil on her cheeks. "What have I done?" he thought, the reality of his political hubris crushing him beneath its weight. "God, what have I done?" Lisa woke to the rhythmic, synthetic hum of a medical monitor and the scent of sterile rubbing alcohol. She didn't open her eyes immediately. She took stock of her body. The bone-deep rattling cold of the Tillamook forest was gone, replaced by the heavy, suffocating warmth of a heated weighted blanket. The fiery itching on her skin had dulled to a dull ache, heavily coated in a soothing, medicinal salve. An IV line tugged slightly at the back of her left hand. She was alive, and she was trapped. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The room was unfamiliar. A massive vaulted ceiling with dark wood beams, floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass overlooking a sprawling, snow-dusted mountain range, and a roaring fire in a stone hearth. She wasn't on the jet anymore. She was in the Alpha King's private wing at the high-altitude mountain estate. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed, bathed in the orange glow of the firelight, was David. He looked terrible. He was still wearing the same trousers and ruined white shirt from the truck stop, though someone had bandaged his hands. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of weeks without sleep, and his posture was slumped, a stark contrast to the terrifying monolith of power he usually projected. "The doctor flushed the silver from your bloodstream," David said quietly, his voice raspy. He didn't move toward her. He stayed rigidly in the chair, as if afraid any sudden movement would make her shatter. "It will take a few weeks for your wolf to fully wake up from the suppression, but there is no permanent organ damage." Lisa stared at him. She didn't feel relief. She felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. "I want to go back," she said. Her voice dry but completely steady. David flinched. His jaw tightened, the muscles ticking rapidly. "You know I cannot allow that, Lisa. You nearly killed yourself. Another 48 hours in those woods with that poison in your system, and your heart would have stopped." "My heart stopped 6 months ago," Lisa replied, her eyes drifting away from him to stare blankly at the dancing flames in the hearth. "When I felt your teeth sink into Victoria's neck." The name dropped into the quiet room like a live grenade. David leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, pressing the heels of his bandaged hands into his eyes. "You don't understand the politics of it. You don't understand what was at stake." "Then enlighten me," Lisa said, a cold, bitter edge creeping into her voice. She slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position, ignoring the dizziness that washed over her. She pulled the thick blankets up to her chin. "Explain to me how the sacred, biological imperative of a true mate is superseded by a treaty." David dropped his hands, looking at her with a desperate, pleading intensity. Victoria's father, Alpha Thorne, had allied with the rogue factions in the Canadian territories. He had an army of 4,000 wolves massing at the northern border. If I hadn't secured the alliance through a binding mark, a public, undeniable claiming of his daughter, they would have marched south. Thousands of our people would have been slaughtered, Lisa. Pups, elders. It would have been a massacre. He stood up, pacing the length of the rug at the foot of the bed. I arrogantly thought our fated bond was strong enough to withstand it. I thought I could give Victoria the title, the political theater, and keep my soul tied to you. I didn't know the bond would sever. I swear to you on my life, I did not know. Lisa watched him pace. She saw the genuine torment in his eyes, the heavy burden of a crown that demanded impossible choices. A part of her, the part that had loved him before the betrayal, ached to comfort him. But the reality of her broken biology was a wall of ice between them. "You made a tactical choice to save your kingdom," Lisa said softly, her voice devoid of anger, which somehow made it infinitely worse. "And I understand that, David. You are a king. You did what kings must do." David stopped pacing, looking at her with a flicker of hope. "But Lisa continued, her eyes locking onto the faint, raised scar visible just above the collar of his shirt, Victoria's answering bite. A king who cannot choose his mate is no king at all. You traded me for peace. I am not angry at you for saving your people. I am leaving you because I refuse to be the casualty of your reign. I will not be your secret, tucked away in this mountain while another woman wears my crown and carries your scent. She is nothing to me, David roared, the Alpha command slipping out, vibrating the glass windows. I haven't touched her since the ceremony. The pack knows it. She knows it. I have spent the last 6 months tearing the continent apart looking for you. It doesn't matter, Lisa shouted back, the sudden burst of emotion tearing at her raw throat. Tears finally spilled over her lashes. The bond is gone, David. You broke it. You can put me in a gilded cage. You can surround me with guards. But you cannot force my soul to recognize a man who gave himself to someone else. The silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. David stared at her, his chest heaving, the absolute truth of her words stripping away his final defenses. He had found her, but he had lost her entirely. The heavy oak doors of the medical wing burst open, shattering the tense silence. Marcus, the Beta, stood in the doorway, his face pale and drawn tight with anxiety. My king, forgive the intrusion, but you have a catastrophic situation in the Great Hall. David didn't take his eyes off Lisa. I gave explicit orders not to be disturbed, Marcus. Alpha Thorn is here, sire. And Queen Victoria, Marcus said, the title tasting like poison in the room. They received word that you recalled the border guards and returned to the estate. Thorn is demanding an audience. He says your prolonged absence and neglect of his daughter is a breach of the treaty. He is threatening to mobilize the northern forces by dawn if you do not present yourself and solidify the mating. Lisa let out a hollow, humorless laugh. She looked at David, her eyes deadened. Duty calls, Your Majesty. Don't keep your queen waiting. David looked at Lisa, the golden light in his eyes slowly transforming from desperate grief into something chillingly absolute. The frantic energy that had consumed him for 6 months suddenly vanished, replaced by a terrifying, calm resolve. Marcus, David said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with ancient, primal authority. Bring the pack elders to the Great Hall, all of them, and bring me the ceremonial silver. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock. Sire, you cannot mean— Do it, David commanded. He turned back to Lisa. Can you walk? Why? She asked, a flicker of genuine fear piercing her apathy. What are you doing? I am going to fix what I broke, David said. He walked to the closet, pulling out a heavy, fur-lined cloak. He draped it gently over her shoulders. You said a king who cannot choose his mate is no king at all. You are right. Despite her protests, David helped her to her feet. The estate was eerily quiet as they walked down the sprawling stone corridors, the air thick with the impending storm. When the massive double doors of the Great Hall were thrown open, the noise hit them like a physical wave. Hundreds of pack members, elders, and regional alphas were gathered. At the center of the room stood Alpha Thorn, a massive, scarred brute of a man. And beside him, Lady Victoria, looking regal, furious, and deeply humiliated. The room fell dead silent as David entered, supporting Lisa at his side. What is the meaning of this, David? Thorn bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. You abandoned my daughter for half a year, and you return parading a filthy human stray in front of the pack? A low, menacing growl ripped from David's chest, so loud and violent that Thorn involuntarily took a step back. She is not a stray, David said, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the vast hall. She is Lisa, and she is my true, fated mate. Whispers erupted like wildfire among the elders. Victoria's face flushed dark red with rage. "You marked me, David. Before the gods and this pack, you bound yourself to me. A true mate bond means nothing once the physical mark is laid." "You are correct, Victoria," David said, walking slowly toward the center of the room, leaving Lisa standing near the entrance, supported by Marcus. "The mark is absolute. It binds the soul. It secures the treaty." He stopped a few feet from Thorn and Victoria. He reached out his hand. One of the oldest pack elders, trembling visibly, stepped forward and placed a long, intricately carved dagger into David's palm. The blade was forged of pure, unadulterated silver. Lisa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. No, he wouldn't. To sever a completed mark without the death of a mate was an ancient, nearly forgotten lore. It required the Alpha to physically excise the bond from his own flesh using silver, a process so agonizing and biologically devastating that most who attempted it died of the shock. "David, no!" Lisa screamed, stumbling forward, but Marcus caught her arms, holding her back. "A treaty built on a lie is a rot that will eventually destroy us all," David announced, looking directly into Thorn's shocked eyes. "I took your daughter's mark to prevent a war. I betrayed my soul to save my crown. But I will no longer live as half a man." David turned the blade inward. Without a moment's hesitation, he drove the silver dagger directly into the juncture of his neck and shoulder, right through the center of Victoria's mark. Victoria screamed in phantom agony as the metaphysical tether connecting them was violently snapped. David dropped to his knees, choking on his own blood, the silver burning through his veins like liquid fire. The hall erupted into chaos. Thorn roared in fury, shifting into a massive gray wolf, preparing to tear the dying king apart. But a sound, louder and more terrifying than Thorn's roar, shattered the room. It was a howl, pure, untamed, and laced with absolute lethal dominance. Lisa broke free of Marcus's grip. The trauma of watching her mate mutilate himself had shattered the chemical suppression of the silver nitrate in a single heartbeat. Her wolf, dormant and starving for 6 months, exploded to the surface in a surge of protective fury. Her bones snapped and reformed in midair. Where the fragile, poisoned woman had stood, a massive, pitch-black wolf with glowing hazel eyes now landed on the stone floor. Lisa stood over David's bleeding, convulsing body, baring her teeth at Alpha Thorn. The sheer, terrifying power of a true queen defending her king radiated from her, forcing Thorn's wolf to whimper and lower his head in instinctual submission. Lisa gently nudged David's face with her snout. Through the haze of blood and silver, the king opened his golden eyes. The artificial bond was dead, but as Lisa's warm, healing energy flooded into him, a new thread, forged in fire and sacrifice, snapped brilliantly into place. The Northern Treaty shattered that night, and though the threat of war lingered on the borders for years, the Eastern Pack had never been stronger. Alpha Thorn retreated, humiliated by the undeniable raw power of a true fated pair. It took months for David to recover from the silver poisoning, and the deep scar on his neck never faded. But every morning, as he woke to the scent of rain and wild freesia, he traced that scar with quiet gratitude. Lisa had not just returned to him. She had been crowned before the gods, proving that true loyalty cannot be legislated, and true love will tear down the world just to rebuild it right. If this dramatic tale of fated love, betrayal, and ultimate sacrifice kept you on the edge of your seat, please like this story, share it with your fellow romance readers, and subscribe for more thrilling, high-stakes shifter fiction.